Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation, a Stranger Things podcast. I'm Robin.
I'm Heidi.
I'm Jenna.
I'm Steve.
And this is our second Hopes, Fears, and Expectations episode. We did this once before when we were awaiting season 4, and now we are in a very long waiting period for season 5. So with that in mind, and picking up from where we left off in our preceding episode regarding our lingering questions, let's get into some of our hopes, fears, and expectations for the 5th and final season of Stranger Things.
Hopes and expectations. Hopefully this isn't spoiler territory for anybody. We recently watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. That movie ends so well.
Oh.
I
really liked it.
It's a happy ending, and I'm like, these guys deserve it. Every character in Guardians is so like, man, they've been through it. And I want that for my Stranger Things cast as well. I'm invested in these characters, like I said, and I would just love to see them actually having a good time at the end of season 5. Whoever's left, you know. I can get behind a couple of characters dying for catharsis, for whatever, you know, okay. But then I want to see them having a good time at the end.
Mm-hmm. My kind of like quirk as a person who's like enjoying media is that I don't like character death. So I definitely hope that there won't be any more. I don't know that I can call that an expectation, you know? That's not necessarily realistic no matter what property it is, and especially with something like Stranger Things.
Right there with you.
But that is my hope. And my expectation is that it'll be a wild ride. There's going to be some great stuff. I think we can definitely expect more of that like character development that we have grown to love. But I think like, you know, at the end of season 3, you said to me, so Heidi, what are your hopes, or do you have hopes, fears, expectations? And I just went, no. And
fair,
you know, and my like logic for that was season 3 was so different than what I was expecting or fearing or hoping, and yet it ended up being really compelling. And here I am looking forward to season 4. And so I'm trying to like in a real way, I am kind of trying to keep that energy of no, I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen. And I'm just going to let them tell me.
Mm-hmm. I'll say that another hope is I want Kali to come back. The only thing, though, that kind of ties into a fear there is that my fear would be that the finale and maybe even a large chunk of season 5, even though that they're like, it's going to be focused in Hawkins, we're going to narrow the scope. I'm like, but that doesn't necessarily get into the question of, you know, the mind fights. Does that mean that a lot of season 5 is going to be in that mindscape weird space? And especially if Kali's there. And so, you know, that's my fear. My fear is that it's not necessarily going to be a lot of stuff in the Upside Down. It's going to be mind fights. And I would hope that that's not the case. You know, not only are they going to keep it grounded in Hawkins, but they've said it's going to be a lot of echoing of the first season. So my hope would be that if there's going to be fighting going on, even if it's a lot of telekinesis, that it will be in the real world. It won't be in someone's mind. Mm-hmm. Because again, we didn't see Kali go into people's minds. It was all she externalized the hallucinations. And I think that could actually be really interesting when you have her clash with Vecna. That could be really interesting. So that's a hope / fear, I guess. But yeah, and I'm gonna echo Heidi very, very like loudly on that. I'm very much I don't want anyone to die. The film production team that I'm a part of, Starwipe Films, I have a very, very small part in their film Apocalypse Rock. That was one of the earliest connections I made with them. We ended up going to quite a few film festivals, and one of the things that we did when we went to the Westchester Film Festival in Pennsylvania was someone made like a bingo board of here are all the things you can expect to see at this festival. All these like indie film tropes, like cut to black gunshot, stuff like that. Like
bingo.
all of this super dark stuff. And one of the things that happened at every festival we went to was that Apocalypse Rock, which also has a very positive ending, despite the fact that it's literally the premise of it is the last man alive holding up in a rock and roll radio station, blasting out a rock and roll radio show every day in hopes that someone out there might hear him. That sounds like a very fun take on a very dark situation. It's exactly what it is, but it actually has a very uplifting ending. And everyone told us how surprising that ending was and how much they enjoyed it. I mean, in one of the behind scenes featurettes that I worked on for the Blu-ray and DVD release was that Brian, Pennington, the director, he said the energy they wanted to bring to these festivals was like, hey, you're like leaving school early to go like, let's crack open a beer, let's start having some fun. And how much of an anomaly that is in the indie films like sphere. At least it was at the time that we were doing this. This was pre-pandemic. I don't know if that's still what it's like, but those tropes still seem to exist. And so the reason I say all of that is because my feeling in big budget, big studio stuff like Stranger Things is that while there's a lot of call to like, no, killing off your characters it's more unexpected, it's more bold, it's more edgy. I'm like, but is it? Because right now that is super prevalent everywhere. Like even Jenna, you saying that about Guardians, it's like, that is not the norm. Like I would argue it's not the norm right now. So the idea of like saying all of that, to me, the bolder, more ambitious decision would be not to kill anybody. Let them have their happy ending, because just because they don't die doesn't mean they haven't been through some shit. Again, with the fact that season 1 is still considered the best, the only person who dies in that season is Barb. Will survives. And just because they survive, it's like Hopper still has to come through. He has to overcome his own trauma from Sarah, and so there's still catharsis without death. And so that's kind of my like little soapbox about why I don't want anyone to die. As far as like expectations, I really don't know what they're gonna do about Eddie. 50-50. I think it's very plausible they might bring him back. I don't think that was their initial plan, though. I think if they bring him back, they change their minds after the impact that Eddie Munson had on the fandom. But I also think it's entirely plausible that they won't, because I don't think that was their intention. If they come out and say like that was always their plan, I'm going to call bullshit on that. I just I don't buy it. And I'm not necessarily opposed to them bringing Eddie back if done the right way. Actually, again, to echo something, Heidi, you said about Will's arc in our reactions episodes, like I don't think they have time to thread that needle as delicately as I think that would warrant. And my fear is that if they do make that decision, it'll be handled it'll be a little cumbersome. I'll say that. And because, again, kind of to your point, Steve, like there's so many characters, like already I'm worried they won't give enough time to seeing Dustin's grief. And that's something that I want to see Dustin wrestling with grief the way that, at least similarly to how we saw Max dealing with Billy's death, because I think that's important, or I mean, some of that season 2 energy from them all dealing with the aftermath of what happened to Will,
See, that's where I'm interested in the idea of the no characters dying, because I do love living with the ramifications of very traumatic events. I think that's interesting, and to not lose characters that have experienced those events together makes it all the more interesting. And that's where I lean into like Stephen King, these kids go through a very scary, supernatural, totally traumatic experience, and then it's years later, and they've all become totally different people. Experiences have shaped and defined them, but their inner child is still very there, and especially in the wake of, the fear and the trauma that was Pennywise. And I feel like Vecna has the potential to kind of be that Pennywise, where I feel like all of these kids of Hawkins are kind of similar in a way to me, like they're the kids of Derry. And that's, again, where I'm just drawing popular horror to where how much it's had an influence on this show, too. I would not be surprised if in this final season we get the most, like, Stephen King vibes.
What's interesting to me about that comparison is that Vecna he's a person. Oh, yeah. He's Henry Creel. He started as he's a supernatural human. He's not an alien. So I think it would be interesting if they go that route, if maybe that's kind of his undoing. Yeah. If it's very much like, you're just a person.
Because I do have this thought, and maybe it's something, I don't know if this is a hope or if it's an expectation, but I get the sense that this show could end in a very the characters who survived or the older characters coming together over something. And maybe it's the loss of somebody, or it's a tribute, or maybe it's even a time capsule of this time in their lives. I don't know. But I can see these characters having to deal with the trauma of these events, and that still being something that we are kind of swan-songed out on the end of this show with, is maybe not everybody died, but all these characters are going to be living with this for the rest of their lives.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. My fear would be that if they kill characters off, it's going to be towards the end, and we're going to get the same lack of follow-through with that we got this season.
Yeah.
And there won't be a season 6. And even if they like put it in a comic or put it in a graphic novel or put it in a companion novel, like no, it needs to be in this show. I believe so.
Definitely fear would be what they do with Max next, and how that whole thing plays out. I'm very scared that it's just not going to work. Whatever they do is not going to work. I cannot think of a way to make this situation palatable in any way for viewers, even in keeping with a more horror theme. It's just gross.
I don't know how they get out of Max's storyline without being ableist in some way.
Yeah, So however that goes, it's definitely a big fear of mine. I can't wait to just kind of know what they do with it, though, and just kind of have that resolved, whatever they choose to do.
Kind of a shot in the dark, but it's kind of the returning character conversation. And you know what? I'll call it a shot in the Clark. Just really want to have boo. I would really love it if Scott Clark would come back into the show. And I think this final season would be a really important moment for Mr. Clark to show back up, both in these kids' lives as they're kind of feeling lost in the grief of their loss of Eddie, but also what has happened to the town. And I feel like we could really afford a big dive back to our cool, Uncle Scott about the science of what's going on.
Heidi and I have been joking about it all the way back since season 1 that we want Scott Clark to be their Q. Come in and be like, oh yeah, I've known all along, or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just so long as he doesn't turn out to, like, my fear with Bob in season 2 was that he was going to turn out to have been like working for the lab the whole time. I just don't want them to go that route. Like, let's keep Scott Clark a hero. Like, he's the hero we all need but don't deserve.
Or Weird Al.
Yeah, I just think he's pure, and I think he's another outlet that's like not Hopper and not some of the other characters that the kids love, adore, and I just think it's his time. And I think that right now would be a really great moment to see how his character maybe rises up in Hawkins against some of this right now.
Mm-hmm. Jenna, you had the theory like back in our 2022 episodes reactions, which was the whole time travel thing. You were pondering, are they going to do the whole, we erase everything, we go back in time and make it so none of this ever happened?
None of this ever happened.
Like, I want to believe that that's not like feasible, but I don't know, for some reason I haven't, like, I can't totally discredit that as that might take place. They might do that because they didn't address the time travel thing.
Yeah.
See, what's funny is I had been theorizing that because Linda Hamilton is going to be involved in this next season, which I have been speculating, who is she going to play? Her being Sarah Connor prominently in Terminator time travel is very important to the story of Terminator, and it's made me wonder, as an 80s movie phenomenon as well, could time travel be part of where we go in this? And Linda Hamilton is someone who I would think could be an interesting character for that in particular, but she's just been a character in general. I've been wondering, okay, so we know that a prominent 80s star is going to be in this. Who do we think they're going to be?
Yeah, I don't know, but I want to see her share screen time with Winona Ryder. I can tell you that right now.
Yes, a dream.
Yes, yeah. I don't know. I haven't spent too much time thinking about that, but you make an excellent point. Yeah, the Terminator franchise time travel is huge in that. I'm so dubious about time travel because it gets so messy so quickly.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the complete time rewrite. I think it would be interesting if the characters who you would not necessarily expect to time travel are the ones who end up doing that. Like, if it's like, the Scoops Troop, like as an example, Steve, Dustin, Robin, and Erica, like that would be such an interesting subversion of expectations. I hate to use that expression, but basically, I'm not opposed to time travel. I'm very dubious about it because it's a really fine line to walk.
Yeah, depending on how it's executed, like if we had, and this is not like an official theory that I have or that I think they're going to do, but if they do some version of time travel and then like the very end of the series is going back to November 6, 1983, and we see like another version, basically see the kids playing D&D again, except all's right with the world. Vecna really is, gone. The Upside Down really is gone. And then that like these kids and these adults are really just going to play out their lives in a like different way. Like I would be okay with it, but it would be so bittersweet.
I don't know if I agree with that though. There's so much about all of that first season that like it goes back really, really far. And would Steve and Robin have even met? Would Max have even moved to Hawkins? Like it's just, there's so many things that like when you go down that road, that's what I mean by it gets messy, because it's like, and then you have to, especially with the roster of characters that you have, it just ends up being like, maybe those things, still will happen, but trying to account for all of it, it just,
well, that's why they would end it right there and let you make your own decisions.
But I hate that.
It would be such a.
I don't like it.
It would be such a mourning of a timeline of these characters where they all grew.
Mm-hmm. In that way, yeah.
What I'm imagining right now is a handful of characters looking through a portal at November 6th, 1983, and they're looking at their old selves, and they're probably like really sad and happy about it, but they're also like, wow, I'm saving myself from all of this. How sad is that? Mm-hmm. I can't imagine going back.
It might just come down to Elle making a decision by herself to go back, because she would be the one able to do so. She might have to make that decision all on her own to go back and be like, what if we just never met and none of this ever happened to them or whatever, whether or not that would actually be the right decision would be a subjective thing for the characters to decide. So she might just decide that that's the right thing to do. I don't know. What time of year do you think they'll set it in?
Oh,
my hope would be winter, because I mean, even though we got Hopper in Russia during winter, they haven't done Hawkins in winter apart from the tail end of season 1.
I was thinking that my initial thought was I hope they put it back in fall. But maybe winter would be good too. Maybe Christmas would be good.
Yeah, or like right around the new year. Fall or winter would be my preferences.
Mm-hmm. I could see a similar season 1 formula where it's like in fall, but maybe by the time we're really wrapping up the end, it's maybe near Christmas. And that's definitely where I can see a handful of characters in a wistful moment with a song like a carol or something like that. What's that one carol? I'm just thinking of the lyric that's like, through the years we all will be together.
Oh, have yourself a merry little Christmas. Yeah.
That seems like a relevant song there too. And Christmas is also a time of missing and connection. And I feel
family,
like that
which
can
is
be
a huge theme in Stranger Things.
Oh yeah. I just feel like that could be a great way to bookend it as well.
It'd be interesting if they do something with November 6th, like if they start season 5 on November 6th, or if that's the date that they end it, like November 6th, 1990 or something like that.
Well, I'm glad you just said that, because isn't the Upside Down frozen in that? That does make me curious about how time travel, or at least even that specific point in time, could be very relevant in this next season. I totally forgot that actually until just now, that the Upside Down is stuck in that.
In 1983, which it's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do also in terms of the how much time has passed. I don't know how much of that is set in stone at this point from, based on what they had written pre-strike. At this time of recording, the strikes are still ongoing. I will say that that's one area that's fortunate about the fact that they didn't start filming before those strikes happened, because then if they had, they would have been in very similar circumstances to what happened in season 4 with all the COVID breaks, and you would have had like these very obvious time jumps. So I'm glad, like in terms of when they were filming, because the kids got older. Yeah. So I don't know how much of that you would have this time, because they are all in their 20s now. But at the same time, who's to say?
I think leaning into the hopes just one last time, I just think there's so much like emotional comeuppance with every single character that I almost hate that it's an expectation at this point. But when you have this wide of an ensemble and I'm coming into a final season, I mean, dare I say it, I don't want them to Game of Thrones it on this one and just totally underhand it, this whole season. I mean, be like, dang, woof.
Yeah.
But I do have high expectations now. Like, there are so many characters still on the field. There's so many people that intimately care about one another. And I really hope to get not even resolution there, but just really lean into some of those moments. Like, as much as I can care about the love triangle that's Jonathan, Nancy, and Steve, I'm really just more enamored with the idea that they all care about each other.
Yeah.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I hope that no matter what any of those end result things are, that I know is really great fan service and the biggest beats we review anything about, I just hope we really get to live in how much this whole unit cares about one another. And that to me will probably be the biggest expectation I have, because this last season felt very split the party.
Yeah.
This better feel very honed in on the party is kind of my biggest, I think expectation.
How do you guys think that'll relate to Will coming out and our expectations for that? Maybe what do we think they might go for?
We talked about it in our chapter 9 part 2, but the Variety article that just was released recently, I don't know if
Oh, the one about Noah Schnapp?
Yeah. So one of the things that they said at the end of the episode, which is what I talked about, or at the end of the article that I talked about in chapter 9, was how they said that Will is going to be a big character in season 5. Like they're putting a lot of focus on Will.
That's great, because Will kind of has a spidey sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's something that in the real world here too, I think not only is he going to have a super ability that is like, I guess, in tune with helping the narrative, but I do see him being a very important part to how this closes.
The article is called Noah Schnapp's Coming Out Journey. The Stranger Things star would still be closeted if not for Will Byers being gay. So the quote is, Will really takes center stage again in 5, says Ross Duffer. This emotional arc for him is what we feel is going to hopefully tie the whole series together. Will is used to being the young one, the introverted one, the one that's being protected. So part of his journey, it's not just sexuality. It's Will coming into his own as a young man, end quote. So what I like about that, I mean, I've said it before. My big hope is that Will is going to have powers.
Yeah.
My big hope is that Will is Will the Wise. Like, that honestly would be, and that he survives. I really want Will to survive.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100.
Yeah.
Like, one of the other things that they theorized over on the Ham Radio podcast is that he feels everything on the back of his neck, which is where the Soteria is, where it was in Henry. I don't know if that's true, but I like that direction of thought. So
There's a connection there.
I don't know that I would like it if Will had powers.
Oh, really?
I just feel like, to me, from his experiences in season 1, he feels like a doomed character. But I do hope that's not the case now that we've gotten to know him more over the other seasons, because he was barely in season 1.
Yeah.
But he did feel very doomed to me.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
well, that would be such a twist if he had actual powers. To me, that would feel like it comes out of nowhere. So they would have to somehow build that up in a way that it just doesn't come out of the blue.
That's
completely.
fair. I guess I will say, though, one of my, lingering questions, I hadn't thought about it in this way because I've thought about it more from a hopes, fears, expectations point of view. But what is Will's deal? I still maintain that Will has been a target from the Shadow, from Vecna, from whomever. He has been after Will specifically. Before Elle became the target, I still think it was Will, even though, now technically you could make the argument that, VH1 was always looking for Elle. I still think there's something about Will. So I guess if it's not powers, then I guess my hope or expectation would be that we find out what it is, the Shadow or Vecna, whoever it is, whatever it was, that we find out why. So I don't have a theory about that, apart from he is Will the Wise, he has powers, but don't know.
As far as my thoughts went on him having powers, it was similar to a Spider-Man. I just thought, similar to Peter's Spidey sense, I think his scratching his neck, or that nape of his neck, I just feel like he sort of has a Spidey sense for the danger, that is VH1 or any of the creations or things that have even come out of the Upside Down. He seems to have an awareness that I'm going to call primeval awareness, like a ranger. I just feel like he has that ability and knows when certain things are within 60 feet.
See, that would be cool because they've kind of sort of alluded to that already. So maybe if they just developed that a little bit, that'd be pretty cool.
So it's
I'm
like
here
a
for that.
spidey sense I think I'm here for, but I don't know about full-blown power. I think that's where I want Lost Sister to come back.
Well, like that's fine.
And,
like that is as far as
yeah.
like by powers, like something like that, I'm down.
Yeah.
Like that would meet my hope.
Some of the other kids, like maybe she was the tip of the iceberg that I got some more of in season 2, but there's also a whole bunch of other kids that have been through a whole bunch of abuse, and I'm wondering if for any reason any of those other kids are out there, and if this convergence has done something that's almost like a calling or like a shining, and they actually can all feel it. Like maybe they all feel it.
So you're
or the ones that have survived, made it away, any of those things. If there's anybody else that's not L, not 8, I'm just wondering if there's even a possibility there's any more out there.
Well, because it would be cool if it's more like that's an interesting take, because the idea that it's like they're not necessarily all from the lab, because I think they all died. I think apart from 8.
I think so too, but I was like, is there any possibility there's others out there that also just weren't in the program?
Well, because Henry came from nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, like just the Force happened to be strong with this one. So okay, you know, like maybe I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Just food for thought on the power train about
Yeah.
like what characters would have powers that could maybe be. And I'm not saying this is going to be like, you know, Stranger Things Endgame where all of a sudden a portal opens and all of the kids
Right,
step
yeah,
out
yeah.
and we all fight Thanos. I mean, VH1.
Yeah.
Oh no, we're gonna have to cut back to that clip when it happens.
I know. Oops. I know. Oh no.
Yeah,
I'll cursed
yeah.
by saying it out loud. But I think that's where I'm at with that still, because maybe that genesis of things that happened on November 6th, 1983, I just think it's all going to come down to L in the end.
I think somewhere, it might have been on ham radio. It might have been on one of the other Stranger Things podcasts, but I saw somewhere someone was saying it would be really interesting if season 5 opens in 1983, but it's in a completely different part of Hawkins, or even in a different part of the world. Like it's the same time frame, but we're seeing like a concurrent storyline that has been going on that ends up kind of like what they did actually at the beginning of season 3, but not quite that over the top, like with Russia, because that took place prior to when season 3 starts proper. So in 85, which I'm not saying like, oh, I really want that. I'm just like, that would be interesting if they sell it right. That could be cool.
A development in L's powers that I'm also still like, was this the tip of the iceberg or is there more? And also, I don't know, like this is really the only solution that I've come up with as it's related to Max as well, has been, is 11 only touching the tip of an iceberg that she's been learning so much of her power to use it a certain way? Did she save Max?
Yeah.
Because if she did, and if I'm believing that, and that was just the tip of the iceberg, is she the only reason or way that she can come back?
Well, she saved her body.
Yeah.
She didn't save her mind.
I'm wondering if like maybe she can, and maybe that was just the tip of the iceberg, because I don't think Elle really knew what she did until she came back and was like, oh wait, what?
Yeah. I think that's why you need Kali though, because Elle can go into the void and she can go into people's minds, but she doesn't necessarily have any like, I mean, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, like especially like D&D rules applying here.
Maybe.
But like her psychic abilities don't really have any, like she can't like control like what you're seeing or what's happening. She only has kind of a literal like 1-to-1 kind of power. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but Kali does. She can get in your head and twist things around. She can create things in your mind. Elle can't do that.
Yeah.
So like she can travel through Mindscape, but she can't really like control or create anything. So I'm interested in seeing where that maybe goes, and that's why like if they then team up, that could be really cool.
Because while things have been so inconsistent on this power scale of like who is more powerful or where do these powers come from and how do I flex that power muscle to be stronger than, it just makes me wonder if I don't know, if all of the things that happened this season led to Elle having an ability that we don't really fully understand.
I'm here for Elle having more interesting powers. Like, you know, I'm here for it.
Because I wonder if she's a healer.
Yeah. I mean, something that we see, Star Wars is an enormous influence on Stranger Things, and something that we see in like each subsequent Star Wars movie, and even like, getting into some of like the more adjacent properties, is the Force definitely has certain rules, but every time you meet a new Force sensitive, they have some new aspect of Force sensibility and power within the Force. Like, there's some basic stuff, like all the Jedi can use lightsabers, and most of them have some form of telekinesis and so on. But then, even in one of my like favorite Star Wars adjacent properties, the Fallen Order video game, you have Cal, the main character, who can touch an object and like feel its history, which is something like even in the game they're like, oh, that's a rare ability because we've never seen it before. So, having Elle develop, like, we know that her telekinesis is like off the charts, and now we know that, yeah, she can enter into someone's consciousness, and not just the void, but literally enter into someone's consciousness and like interact with them. I don't think it would be too hard of a sell, to introduce some new aspect of a power, especially if she's like working with Kali and the two of them are like tag teaming to try to figure out how to do something, and then they stumble on a new power. Or if she's like, doing like the Rocky montage and training for her next like, mind fight and with Vecna, and she's like, oh wait, I can do this. Or maybe she like steals one of Vecna's abilities and, does an Uno reverse on him.
Like Rogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I've been wondering if like maybe this is a real deep stretch, and I don't know if it's even something I totally love, but maybe has that always been her power? And is that the power that's actually been dormant this whole time that hasn't really been awoken? Because maybe if all this destruction and telekinesis that we see from VH1, maybe that's just always who he was and what his power was and what that manifested into. And maybe she always was more powerful for reasons that we couldn't quite understand.
Well, thematically, I actually really like that a lot, because one of the sort of threads we discovered through the season of this podcast was this question of, however clumsily they might have gotten there, this shift of Elle, her power and versus her motivation, the empathy versus anger, and how the empathy fuels her motivation, which fuels her anger, which fuels her power. Her remembering her birth and her mother saying, I love you, how that there's this shift from anger being the motivator to love. But like, if you even sang the words, maybe she's a healer, that could be fascinating.
Because there's also a D&D property here that I wonder in some previous editions of the game too, but like any character that is undead, if you heal an undead, that is actually doing damage to them.
Right.
And I wonder if she's a healer, and the real danger that she might actually be to someone like Vecna is that she could actually heal him whole. And then he really would be dead or gone for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I dig that.
Right? Like,
yeah.
and then isn't that on a whole nother level, like us talking about the trauma that's been this show, the healing from that trauma? And maybe in the end, it's her saying like, Henry, it's not my job to save you. And like, you needed to do all of this for yourself all along. It's just a shame that this is how it was done.
Well, not to mention, so much of Elle's upbringing was formed around Brenner as well. Like Brenner's influence, and how like he's always been like, building her towards this aggressive, like, no, your weapons, your property, your things. And then her becoming more of a human and tapping into, no, your empathy is actually your power. That could be really cool. I would love that.
Well, then it's like all the love that she's been shown by Hopper, her friends. It's like all of that would have led to this big discovery.
Where she doesn't have to kill herself along with, Vecna to die.
And this is crazy because I had just been wondering for a little nugget of a moment, like, is she possibly a healer? Because that was the only way I could find my own resolution with Max in particular.
Yeah.
And then that dove even further into like, Well, all right. I guess if she's even maybe that much more of a healer, like maybe that's what she's always been and that's what's dormant. I don't know.
And since you're pulling from the D&D aspect of that, like I find that plausible even more just because of how much the Duffers are into D&D. Like I think that could be cool.
Kind of connecting with like healing and undead again, to make another Star Wars reference. In The Force Awakens, when Rey and Kylo have their final fight on Starkiller toward the very end of the film, and Kylo is trying to tap into the dark side of the Force, and he starts like beating at his own wounds to inflict pain on himself. That physical pain helps him tap into the dark side of the Force. I am sure that Vecna has got something very similar going on with all of his like bats, monsters, like squelchy vines thing that, you know, that he gets into. And Elle being able to use, for want of a better term, the light side of the Force, even when she is being violent or destructive, is really fascinating. If you kind of like take like the wider view and think like how she will grow and use her powers not just for protection and violence, but also for healing. And we've already seen, you know, that to a certain extent now, because even if she wasn't able to save Max's mind, she did already revive Max's body. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's super awesome. To circle back to your question about what do we think is going to happen with Will's coming out, I'm a little scared. I don't know that I'm necessarily scared about like how the show is going to handle it as a whole. You know, I went on a little bit of a journey on Will's conversation with Jonathan, but where I landed with it was that I actually really love it. And especially like the way it's performed and the way it's written, and they kind of talk around it, which is just feels very authentic and realistic to me. But where Mike is now as a character, I don't trust him with that conversation. I feel like I trust the show and I worry less about what's going to happen to Will as a character versus like the very specific question of how is his coming out going to be handled. I worry for him. You know, he's already had such a difficult time.
Come out to Dustin.
Yeah.
I've said it before. I will say it forever. That is a hill I will die on.
That's what I was about to say. I was kind of hoping that, while I do hope there is a conversation with Mike, because I want to challenge them to do it. And I feel like if they don't do it, then I'm going to be like, you were afraid, and I'm mad at you for not doing that.
I already feel that way about them for a lot of things that they do.
Yeah.
But
And so that's where I feel like I'm going to probably lean into that even more so if they don't do that. But I was hopeful that he would do so with somebody else. And I was thinking Dustin would be perfect.
Maybe Dustin and Lucas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Honestly, if it was both of them, my heart would melt.
Yes.
Like I really would love that, because I feel like for some odd reason, I think the two of them, like the way you know your friends and you just know them. And sometimes even when a friend says something like, hey, I've got something to tell you.
You know.
You usually know. And I feel like those are the characters that are actually going to probably put their hands on his shoulder and say, we know, and like, we love you.
Yeah.
That's what I want. But also, do I actually think any of that could possibly happen with Mike and in his current state, talking about where we've last left him and all of that? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like it could be dangerous. Here's the question I would really ask, and it's mostly because I had a conversation about this with somebody, because they were like, well, I don't think Will's gay at all because he didn't say it. And I was like, that's a tough conversation, man. I was like, first of all, I was like, do you want me to talk to you about the 80s?
Yeah.
I was like, also, does everybody's journey of identity have to have a label? I was like, because that might be something you just projected. I don't know, man. I was like, because I think I'm comfortable with that and I don't have to have an answer. But then he asked me, well, if we get into the final season and he doesn't come out and we don't get it at all, he was like, well, then how are you going to feel then? And I was like, I'll probably feel like the Duffer Brothers were weak for not rising up and tackling something that also was very real. And that would be a bummer. I would just be really bummed out if they don't do it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much.
something I used to say was how, well, Robin never says it either, but she does still very clearly communicate that to Steve. So my feeling on that was like, well, what story are they telling around those words? But given the fact that, that Will is going to be a central figure of season 5, I would be surprised if they don't do something. So it's a question of how. It's not the what. I've said this all through season 4. It's not the what, it's the how. It's how do they execute it. And it's just like Dustin's your guy. And that's one of the reasons why, like, I know I've heard a lot of conversation among the fandom of like, if it's going to be reflective of season 1, then does that mean we're getting the core 4 of Dustin, Lucas, Mike, and Elle? And I'm like, maybe, but that doesn't account for a lot of the characters that weren't there in season 1. That doesn't account for Erica. It doesn't account for Will, frankly, so I'm just curious as to,
what if it's a walk through Mirkwood and all of a sudden Will's like, hey, Dustin, Lucas.
Except Hawkins is on fire.
Also true.
So,
Curious, what other horror movie influences in particular could be out there? Because every season has had pretty strong, like, horror contributions to it. As
the strikes get resolved, hopefully for the best good of actors and writers, and that's the ultimate goal. But
here.
one thing I had thought about doing was doing maybe another episode about, like, what would it be like if we never got a season 5? What would it be? How would this feel if this was all we got? I don't think it's going to be that, but just as like a thought experiment. So I don't know. We may return to that question for a future episode. We'll have to see. Listeners, you'll have to chime in and let me know if that's an episode you'd be interested in hearing.
Well, this has been fun, and I'll just say really quickly without any transition that a group format was really fun. And
it was.
And while I enjoyed the 2 episodes that we got to record together, Robin, this was really fun. Yeah. I really, really liked this a lot, and I just want to stress that.
I would do this again a lot if I didn't live 4 hours away.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like I didn't even realize until we were recording that, like, it's season 4 and there's 4 of us in the wrap up. That was I promise that was an accident.
Of course.
Yeah.
A coincidence.
We're gonna need a 5th person for this season 5.
I was thinking it.
And we've got a guest, Sean Astin.
Yeah. Well, then I think that's going to conclude our contemplation on season 4. So yeah, thank you all for joining me on this, not just this episode, but just this project over the course of 4 seasons. This whole endeavor has brought me a lot of joy, and I hope it has for the 3 of you as well. At least some happiness.
Can confirm. Thanks, Robin.
But that's not it for the podcast. We are officially returning to the Starcourt Cinema series, and as a refresher, that is a series in which we review the films and or properties that are referenced in Stranger Things. I had a blast doing the first episode of that series with you, Jenna, when we reviewed E.T., and I'm looking forward to diving back into that with returning co-hosts as well as a few new ones. Including hopefully Brian, who I've referenced off and on through this whole thing. So watch our socials for the details on when those episodes will start dropping. But until then, as always, thank you for listening and for being a part of this 4-season journey as well. Those previously mentioned socials include TikTok and Instagram, links for which are in the show notes, along with some links. And if you're a fan of our pod, consider rating and reviewing us. Coffee and Contemplation is available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, over and out.
Play a game with a lot of TV shows and movies I watch where, because I like Spider-Man and I emulate the character visiting kids in hospitals and so on and so forth, I just like to ask, from a story that you're watching, what character do you think is most likely to become Spider-Man? I would say in Stranger Things it is Steve Harrington, but in this context I begin to wonder if it could be Elle.
Yeah.
He's got the potential, I think.
Yeah. It's a musing game mostly for me while I'm watching anything. And imagine when you're watching something like Barbie and you're like, I wonder who will become Spider-Man in this.
Yeah. Alan.
Nailed it.